قولي اللهم ثبتنا عند الموت بلا إله إلا الله آمين يا رب العالمين. Welcome back everyone. Tonight we move on to another session of a different presentation that we have been working on for some time, and that is evolution of fiqh or evolution of Islamic law. And in this one, we are looking at the history of how the Islamic scholars developed Islamic law, the fiqh, what were the differences between them, how the earlier generations of scholars treated those differences, as opposed to how the later generations looked at those differences. We are looking at the different madhabs. We are going to talk primarily about the four madhabs, the Hanafi, the Maliki, the Shafi'i, and the Hanbali. Okay? We have already looked at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where there were only two sources of Islamic law, Quran and Sunnah. Then in the time of Khulafa Rashidun, the third source was added, and that was Ijma. This was related to new issues that would come, and now the Sahaba would get together, they would reach a consensus, and that consensus is what we call Ijma. Then the first 100 years after the Khulafa Rashidun, the Abbasid dynasty started, Banu Abbas. And in their time, a fourth source of Islamic law was added, and that was Qiyas, which was an individual scholar giving a fatwa. Okay, so no longer consensus, but an individual scholar giving a fatwa based on his ijtihad, based on his or her knowledge of Islam, Quran and Sunnah. Okay, because it became difficult to make consensus. Muslim world had spread all over, and scholars from the East did not know the scholars of the West. So to make a consensus of worldwide Muslim scholars by that time had become difficult. So then regional scholars and the city scholars would then be at liberty to make fatwa after they had researched the issue in the Quran and the Sunnah. Then after the first 100 years of after Khulafa Rashidun, the the Banu Umayyah were then replaced with Banu Abbas. Okay, and we divide the Banu Abbas period in 200 spans. First 100 years was the time of the major imams, and the second 100 years, the time of the minor imams. This is now where other sources of Islamic law were added. We talked about a few of them in the past. Do you remember any other sources of Islamic law besides the four we discussed? Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, Qiyas. What other sources were used by Muslim scholars? Ijtihad would be the Qiyas, would be the fourth one. Anyone remembers or knows? What other sources could Muslim scholars use to give a ruling about a new matter, an Islamic matter of fiqh? Urf. One of them was custom, culture, how things were done in a specific culture. So after Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, Qiyas, then they would look at culture. Say, okay, let's see how things are done in America versus how things are done in Egypt versus how things are done in Somalia versus how things are done in India or wherever in the world. So then they would use the local cultural norms as a source of Islamic law. So they would say, if in this culture things are done like this, then that's how it should be done. If in the other culture things are done like that, that's how it should be done. Remember, culture is coming number 5 or 6. Can never compete with Quran and Sunnah. So it's not like you go number 1 culture. No. First you go Quran. If it gives answer, that's good. Then you go to the Sunnah. If it gives answer, that's good. Then you see Ijma, the consensus of the Muslim scholars. You go with that answer. Then you go with Ijtihad of scholars on that issue. And if none of them conflict with the culture, then you can use culture. Then it's okay to do things in that cultural way. So this would have to do with things like food and dress, right? Food and dress. So for example, in some countries, people wear certain kinds of dress. As long as that dress is not against the principles of Islam, of modesty, of covering your aura, of making you presentable, then it's okay to wear that dress in that culture. That's how people do it. So Islamic scholars will say it's okay, no problem. But if you went against the culture, then the Islamic scholars might say, well, even though it doesn't conflict the Quran and the Sunnah, but it is causing a cultural, for example, in this country now, wearing rainbow colors. Imagine you're wearing rainbow colored dresses. It has a specific meaning now in this culture. So in this culture, it would be a problem for Islamic scholars to say, no, you're not allowed. Even though, is it a problem in Islam to wear rainbow colors? No problem. Quran and Sunnah are silent about those issues. You can wear them, no problem. But in a specific cultural setting, it means something. So then you should avoid it. But let's say you're in a different culture where those colors mean something else. They represent another movement or another thing, which is okay in Islam. Then it might be okay to wear those colors. So that's where culture to culture differences and how things are interpreted might be used as a source of Islamic law. Another one which we discussed was the concept of istihsan, public welfare, masalih, maslaha. Those are all also used. So public benefit. So let's say something is done for the sake of the benefit of the public, but it might go against the qiyas. Then the Islamic scholar will say, we'll consider a public benefit. It's not going against Quran and Sunnah. It might go against the ijtihad or qiyas of a particular scholar. So then they say public benefit comes number one. Okay, and then qiyas will come. We gave the example of sales of items in the Quran, in the Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned certain fruits and certain dates and said you cannot sell them until you possess them. Until you have them, you cannot sell them, right? So the qiyas ruling says that this would apply to all things. Can I sell my cell phone and I don't even have it in my possession? Can I sell it? I don't have possession of it, but can I sell it to you? If you use qiyas, then you say no, you cannot sell it. But if you use the concept of public benefit, say that it becomes very difficult to first have a cell phone, it is very expensive to acquire it, and then maybe the buyer might not even buy it. So it's a big loss for me if I first get a cell phone from someone and then I sell it to you. You might not even buy it because it's a very expensive item, for example. So in this case, the Islamic scholar will say it's okay for you to buy it from me. I get that money from you, and then I go and get it from the manufacturer and keep a little bit of profit for myself and pay for that. So this is now going against the qiyas, but it is of some public benefit. And this happens mostly in cases where, for example, you are manufacturing very expensive items. For example, these fighter jets, those companies who make these fighter jets, each of these jets is like millions of dollars. So they cannot first make them and then sell it. What they do is they get the orders first. You want it, you pay us first upfront, and then we are going to make it for you, and then we'll give it to you. So this goes against the qiyas, but this is public benefit. If we don't do this, another thing, rent. When do you pay the rent for your house? The beginning of the month or end of the month? Huh? You pay at the end. MashaAllah, you have good landlord. when you move into a house, when is the rent due? See, that shows you have not paid rent because the landlord wants you to give a deposit and the first month rent in the beginning of the month. You haven't even lived in the house. It's due on the first of every month. This is also against Islamic principle. What is the Islamic principle? That you give the money for the service once the service is given. I haven't even received the service. Why should I give the money? You were thinking that, right? So you have not given me the service. Why should I pay you first? Right? You pay at the end, right? At the checkout. But the issue is that's how the convention has become in the world for renting things. You have to pay upfront, not after you have used. Because what will happen? You used it and then you ran away with my money. They made that law for a reason, right? So then Islam will say it's okay. This is okay because it even though it goes against the Islamic principle, but for the public benefit, renting out items will not work out if you paid after using them. You have to do it before. Yes, brother. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, so that's fine. That's fine because the scholars would use this sixth source of Islamic law, which is called istihsan or maslaha, meaning benefit of the public. Because if we stuck with the Islamic principle, it will make life difficult for the people, and Islam never wants to make life difficult for the people. So, in order to facilitate the ease of access to these services, Islamic scholars would open up and say the qiyas, we go against the qiyas. Now, remember, we're not going against Quran and Sunnah. There's a difference here. There's always abuse. Yeah, you can always abuse the system, but we're not talking about that part. We're talking about the general, welfare of the people. The point I'm trying to make is don't confuse this. Istihsan can never go against Quran and Sunnah. Istihsan can go against qiyas. What is qiyas? The Prophet said this, do this. My situation is similar. It's not the same, but it's similar, so I should do the same thing. This is qiyas. So the Islamic scholars say, even though it looks similar to the Prophet's situation, you can still go against the ruling if it has to do with public welfare. Okay? You can never go against the Prophet's. For example, for dates, Prophet mentioned the dates in the hadith. You can never sell dates unless you possess them. So you can never make a law in Islam say to public benefit, in order to make public benefit, let's also allow people to sell dates without having them first. That would be going against the Sunnah. But something like the dates, you can make qiyas and then go against that qiyas if the public benefit demands. So these are two different things. I want to make it very clear. Yes. Because it has to do with perishable items. Okay, the quality. How would you know what the quality is until you show the customer? Or customer might want to taste it. He wants to see the quality, the color, the sweetness, whatever. Also, how can you sell something which is still, in the process of being harvested? It's up in the date palm tree, and I'm telling you the dates of it. What if tomorrow a storm comes, or some bacteria, some disease comes and destroys the dates? So how can I get money from you first and then sell you? So that's why some items the Prophet mentioned said you cannot sell them unless you are possessing them. Food items is what the Prophet mentioned, food items, wheat, barley, those kinds of things the Prophet mentioned. So what I'm saying is the qiyas ruling says everything then should follow the same rule. But then the istihsan ruling says no, if it goes against public benefit, then not everything will follow that same rule. Only those items mentioned in the hadith will follow that rule. Others don't have to follow that rule. That's what I'm saying. Do we understand this? Is it clear? Okay. All right. So let's move on. Today we about the madhabs. We are on number 5 now, meaning the 5th topic on this session. So far, we have seen the evolution of the madhabs within the historical context of the overall development of fiqh. During the era of prophethood, the foundations of fiqh were laid down in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's ijtihads or reasoned rulings, as well as those of his sahaba or companions. During that stage, divine revelation in the form of the Quran and the Sunnah constituted the only source of Islamic law. So remember, in the Prophet's time, there is no ijtihad, there is no qiyas, there is no consensus, ijma. None of those are there. If you want to know something, you go directly to the Prophet. The Prophet is going to tell you whether it's right or wrong, right? You don't need to use your own mind or Islamic scholarship or any of those. Those things develop after the Prophet. In other words, there was only one school of thought or madhab, and that was the Prophet's madhab. This is something to ponder about. Today, people become very emotional about following a madhab. They say you have to follow a madhab, right? Think about the Prophet's time. Was the Hanafee madhab around? Was the Shafi'i madhab around? Was the Maliki madhab around? None of these madhabs were around. So what were the people following in that time? They were following the madhab of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that is actually the madhab we should all be trying to follow. Even these schools of thought, the Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, all these people, what were their goals? Their goal was to follow the madhab of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Their goal was not to split the ummah into different factions. They all wanted the same goal, to follow the truth. In the following stage, that of the righteous caliph, the fiqh principle of ijma evolved, and ijtihad became an independent principle of fiqh under the name of qiyas. So now this is now later on after the Prophet's death. Ijma is added, consensus, where people get together, the Islamic scholars get together, and qiyas, which is the individual ruling of a scholar, or ijtihad. The madhab during this period was in reality that of each of the righteous caliphs, since the final say in legal matters rested with them. So if you are living in the time of Abu Bakr and he is the Khalifa, whose madhab do you have to follow at the end of the day? Abu Bakr. Because Abu Bakr is going to give you the final ruling in matters of dispute. We're talking about matters of dispute where there is no clear hadith, there is no clear Quranic verse. Which madhab are you going to follow now? Which scholar are you going to follow now? In the Abu Bakr's time, it's Abu Bakr is going to tell you the final thing, and you all follow his madhab. In the time of Umar, it's Umar's madhab, because he has the final say in all matters. So the leadership, the imam of the time, or the caliph of the time would tell you, and you all have to follow him. Okay? After Quran and Sunnah, the third source would be then the caliph, in the caliph's time. But what was the way of the khulafa to find out rulings in their time? Quran and Sunnah is a given. They all have to follow it all the time. But after Quran and Sunnah, they would get together. So Umar, whenever new thing would come, new issue comes, what does he do? He invites all the Sahaba, the eminent Sahaba, the scholars of his time. He tells them the issue. They all have a discussion. They give Umar the recommendation. We think this should be done. This should not be done. But at the end of the day, who's going to decide which opinion will be followed? Umar. Umar can even go against the majority. In Abu Bakr's time, when all the Sahaba said we should not send an army to the Roman Empire. Why? Because the Prophet has just died. All these Muslims have just come into Islam. They are starting to revolt. We will have internal problem. How can we send an army to the Romans? The Prophet before his death had already sent an army, decided to send an army to the Roman Empire. So they all gathered against Abu Bakr. They said, no, we should not send an army. Abu Bakr said, even if, animals come into Medina and they eat us alive, even then I'm going to send this army. So he went against the ijma of the Sahaba, because he's the Khalifa. At the end of the day, you have to follow his order. The same thing with Umar, Uthman, Ali, and so on. Yes, sir. And that's what we're talking in this series, right? This factionalism, this kind of division, this obsession with the madhab. So we definitely need the madhab. We definitely need these ulama, because how else are we going to get knowledge if we don't go to the ulama? These are all ulama, right? When we say Hanafis and Shafi'is and who are the ones who are making all these fatwa in these madhab? People of knowledge. So we definitely need those ulama. Allah even said, if you don't know, ask the people of knowledge. So we need them. The problem is when we get stuck with this factional ideology, my madhab is always right, yours is wrong, we're going to fight each other, I'm not going to pray behind you, you go in that masjid, I'm going to go in this masjid. That's where the problem comes in. The problem is not with the madhab itself, the scholarship in it. They're valuable, very valuable for all of us to read about them and learn from them. Problem comes in when you become fanatical in your approach towards the madhab. Instead of treating them as different opinions and researching them and finding the truth, seeing their evidences, what you do is you close your eyes and say, I am from this madhab, I'm following this madhab, all the other madhabs are wrong, my madhab is right. That's when you have gone to extremes, and that's what we need to avoid. Okay? It's fine. That's fine. As long as I said, as long as you don't become fanatical, at the end of the day, we should be Muslim. That should be our greatest identity. And then if you follow a scholar, follow a madhab, that is fine. As long as you know they could be wrong. That's the problem. If you're not willing to admit and you say they are right in every matter, my madhab is always right in every matter, then what you have done is you've made Islamic scholars and you've elevated their position to that of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The only one who will always be right in every matter is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he's being guided by Allah. Anyone after the Prophet can make mistakes. All scholars can make mistakes. There are mistakes we know. Even eminent major scholars have made mistakes in their ruling because they're human beings. It's okay. So we have to treat them like human beings and not like uh, Ambiya. So to give you an example, I always like to give this example. When Osman became the Khalifa, he was leading Hajj. And when he went for Hajj, because he's going from Medina, okay, uh, when it came time for Dhuhr, he prayed 4 rakah. So the Sahaba came to him. Some of the Sahaba came and said, the Prophet, when he came for Hajj, he prayed 2 rakah for Dhuhr, travel prayer, right? Because he's a traveler. He prayed the traveler's prayer. When Abu Bakr became Khalifa, he led the Hajj, he prayed 2 rakah. When Umar became the Khalifa, he led the Hajj, he led 2 rakah. And now you become Khalifa, you're praying all 4. So you have changed it. They said this is wrong. Uthman radiallahu anhu said, in their time, the earlier time, the number of people attending Hajj was small. In my time, thousands are now attending Hajj. I don't want them to go back to their homeland thinking that Dhuhr prayer is 2 rakah. See his logic. His logic is there's so many new Muslims coming and they will come for Hajj and they will go back home and they will say, we went to Mecca and the Khalifa, he prayed the Dhuhr prayer 2 rakah. So that means Dhuhr is 2 rakah. They wouldn't understand because they are new Muslim, they don't have knowledge about these. So I'm going to pray 4 just so that they don't get the wrong impression. The other Sahaba, they understood his logic, they still disagreed. They said, no, still you cannot do it. The Prophet did it, Abu Bakr did it, Umar did it, you cannot do this. He said, I'm going to do it. All those who differed with him when it came time for Salah, they all prayed behind him 4 rakah. They all disagree with him. But when it came time to Salah, what are they doing? They're following the leader. You have to follow the leader. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, you have a different fiqh opinion or not, because this is the only way you're going to keep unity. If everyone starts coming up saying, I think this should be it, I think that should be it, then there will be no order, no unity, no discipline. So this is what we need to learn. This is what later on didn't happen. Later on, you know what happened? As soon as you differ from your imam, your leader, hey, I'm leaving. I'm going to make my own masjid. I'm going to start my own community. I'm going to start my own madhab. That's what happened later on. So this is what I'm saying. In the time of the Khulafa Rashidun, the end word, the last word was with the Khalifa. Whether you like it or not, you can give your opinion. He will listen to you. He should listen to you. He should weigh different opinions. But at the end of the day, he has to choose one of the opinions. He cannot make everyone happy, right? Even in a masjid like this small masjid, we don't have millions of people here. Trust me, it is the most difficult thing to do to make everyone happy. Everyone is pulling the leaders in different. You should come my way, my understanding, my way of doing things. And so you cannot do that. At the end of the day, you have to go with one decision. And a good example in our times is the Eid celebration, right? Should we do it by the calculation method? Should we do it by the sighting of the moon? Let's say in this masjid, for example, here we use the calculation method, right? Let's say you disagree with that method. You say it should be the moon sighting because that's the sunnah, that's the earlier period. At the end of the day, you still have to go with the masjid. You cannot make your own Eid. Say, I'm going to celebrate Eid on a different day because I think this is the right paper. No, because people do that. That's what I'm saying. We are different now. We have lost that understanding of unity. We have lost that understanding of following the Jama'ah, the Masjid, the leadership. That's what kept the earlier generations together. If they acted like us, they would have divided also very, very quickly. Okay, moving on. However, all legal decisions were subject to alteration on the basis of recorded statements or practices of the Prophet ﷺ, that is hadith. Therefore, there was no room for rigidity or factionalism. So even though the caliphs were the ones who had the last word, if somebody brought proof from the hadith of the Prophet or the Quran, then the caliph have to give away. Don't we have the story of Omar when he gave a ruling from the mimbar? What was his ruling? He put a ceiling on the meher. In Omar's time, what started happening? Money came in. Sahaba became rich. So when you become rich, Do you give more to your wife or less to your wife? No, you should give more. Right? You should give more because you are rich, you have money. So people, when they started getting married, they started giving more and more meher to their wives. What did that mean for the poor people in Medina? If every man in the city is giving a lot of meher, thousands of dollars to get married, and I am a poor guy, will anyone marry me? We're not going to marry you because we have better options, right? So Umar ibn Khattab, he said this is discouraging people from getting married. For the poor people, how will they afford this? How will they compete with all these rich people? So he put a ceiling. He said no more than $400, for example. You cannot give more than $400 to your wife in marriage. This is in front of all the crowd. Umar is on the mimbar. He is giving this ruling. A woman stood up in the back. She said, you cannot do it. She challenges Umar in front of everyone. And Umar says, why? He said, because Allah says in the Quran, if you want to give a qintar to your wife, you can do it. Qintar is a lot of gold. It's mentioned in the Quran. Allah used the word qintar, which is a lot of gold. So he said, if Allah allowed men to give their wives lots and lots of gold, who are you to put a ceiling to this? And Umar ibn Khattab immediately realized that he had gone against a verse of the Quran. And in front of everyone, he said, the woman is right and Umar is wrong. And in another narration, he said, oh Umar, you have no knowledge. He's telling himself in front of everyone, you have no knowledge. The woman knows more than you, right? There's no security. Exactly. So what do we learn from this? Is if the Khalifa gives a ruling and then later on some proof is established from the Quran and the Sunnah, then he has to take his ruling back. He cannot go against the Quran. And this is how we should be also. Sometimes we are stubborn, right? Something we are doing wrong, and then a brother will tell you, sister will tell you, here is the hadith, here is the Quranic ayah. And you're like, no, 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 brother, you don't understand. You don't understand what I'm trying to do. You know, in my case, it's okay to go against the hadith. We always think our case is always special, right? It's always special when it's me involved in the subject. The early period of the Umayyad dynasty saw the division of fiqh scholars into two main madhabs with respect to ijtihad, Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith. Now, this is the third phase. After the Sahaba, after the Khulafa Rashidun, when now the kingdom begins, the Umayyad dynasty begins, now Islamic scholars divide into two main madhabs. So this is like the beginning of the madhab, broad beginning. One school was in Hijaz, Medina, Makkah, Taif, that area. This school is called Ahlul Hadith. This school believed in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They had a lot of authentic hadith available because this is Medina and Makkah. Many Sahaba were still living, their children were living, their students were living. So they had a lot of hadith literature available in Makkah and Medina. So they just took the hadith. Any new issue would come, they would say, no, we don't want to deal in new issues. We're going to stick to what Allah and His Messenger left us. Okay? So this group is called Ahlul Hadith. In Iraq, another group was starting, and that was called Ahlul Ra'i, the people of opinion, the scholars of opinion. What these scholars did was they said, in our time in Iraq, hadith is not available. Hadith had not become worldwide phenomenon in the Muslim world. Today we have all the hadith available to us, but in that time, early time, hadith might be available in one area, might not be available in another. It depends on where the Sahaba went, right? Where they settled. Okay? So in Iraq, for example, Abdullah ibn Masud went and he established his school there. But does Abdullah ibn Masud know all the hadith of the Prophet? No. Abu Huraira also knows hadith. Aisha also knows hadith. Anas ibn Malik also. So they are going in other parts, taking their hadith with them. So hadith are being spread in different parts of the Muslim world. No region had all the hadith available to them. Okay, Makkah, Medina had the most. That's why they were okay with hadith, using hadith. In Iraq, since hadith is not available, and also in Iraq there was a second problem. There was a lot of fabrication of hadith. People were lying. In Makkah, Medina, that problem was not there. It was pure. Society was pure. They didn't lie about hadith. But in Iraq, because the politics is happening. Remember, all the politics in the early Muslim years was happening in the Iraq area, okay, especially after the time of Ali when he moved the capital to Iraq. So now there's a lot of lying going on. People are using hadith, making hadith to prove their point, to prove their politics, whatever. So the scholars of Medina, they said, we are reluctant to use hadith because this might be a fabricated hadith, it might be a wrong hadith, and we don't have authentic hadiths available. So instead of hadith, they preferred what? Opinion. Opinion. Their own understanding, scholarly understanding, ijtihad, you can say, right? So this group was known as Ahlur Ra'i, the people of Ra'i. So these are now the two schools emerging in two different areas. One in Medina, Ahlul Hadith, and one in Iraq, Ahlul Ra'i. Do you understand this? These two? All right. These two madhabs evolved into a number of new madhabs during the shift from caliphate to monarchy, when the caliph or the king was no longer the head of the madhab. Since scholars and their students were dispersed throughout the Umayyad state, their personal ijtihad increased in order to solve local issues. Because ijma was no longer possible. Muslim Ummah had spread to all corners of the world. Scholars settled in different areas. They started their own schools. They didn't have much communication with each other. So each scholar and each school became its own independent kind of school or madrasa. And this is the start now of the different madhabs that we later on see. This started in the Umayyad dynasty. It should be noted, however, that during both the period of the Umayyads and that of the early Abbasids, students of fiqh freely and frequently changed teachers and exchanged legal opinions. So even though these schools are developing in different areas in the early period, but one thing which is going on, which is very good, is that these scholars are traveling from different regions and trying to learn from each other. Okay, so for example, Imam Shafi'i, he was a student of Imam Malik. His first teacher was Imam Malik. Then he went and learned from Imam Layth ibn Sa'd in Egypt, okay, or his students actually. He also went to Yemen to learn from the Zaydi scholars. Zaydi madhab was another madhab of that time. He's still there in the world. Then he went to Iraq to learn from the students of Imam Abu Hanifa. And then his student, one of his students is Ahmad ibn Hanbal. So you see the connection between the four schools of thought. Imam Shafi'i, his teacher is Imam Malik. His teachers are Hanafee Mad-hab, scholars from the Hanafee Mad-hab and from other madhabs. And he himself is the teacher of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. So all four madhabs are kind of interact. There is knowledge shared between the different madhabs. So this is in the early periods. The major imams, they were flexible. They learned from each other. They respected each other. They were teachers and students of each other. This thing changed in the later period. In the later period, there was no exchange between the different madhabs. If you are from one madhab, you stay in that madhab, you learn from that madhab, and that's it. You don't have to interact with the other madhabs. So that was a later development which caused problems. In effect, therefore, the flexibility of the previous eras was maintained up until this point. During the latter part of the Abbasid dynasty, fiqh was formalized and systematized. The number of madhabs decreased and the differences between them became emphasized due to the state's preference for some madhabs over others and the rise of inter-madhab rivalry promoted by court debate. So now in the Abbasid era, something starts in the later Abbasid era. What happens now is that the state now starts patronizing, supporting certain madhabs. And the students of the other madhabs start declining. Imagine if the government announces, you're living in a country where the government announces, if you memorize the madhab of Imam Malik, you are going to get a position of being a judge. What will happen to the other madhabs other than Maliki? They will start shrinking because everyone is going to be interested in the money, the position, the job. So they will all start coming towards the Maliki madhab. So this is what happened in the Abbasid era. Certain madhabs were promoted by the state and the government, and so other madhabs became sidelined. Remember, there were hundreds of madhabs. Today we only talk about four. There were hundreds of madhabs. Some of the madhabs were more popular than these four in their time. They had more students. But what happened over time? Those madhabs declined because of factors like state patronage. Okay? Another thing which started happening in this time was court debate, and this was the start of factionalism, because the king or the governor, he would bring two scholars from two different madhab, let's say a Maliki and a Hanafi, and he would give them a topic. You have to debate this topic. Whoever wins is going to get gold and silver. Whoever loses will be humiliated in the court. So now the scholarship was no longer about right and wrong, finding the truth. What is the scholarship about now? It's about winning. It's about I have to show my madhab is right and your madhab is wrong. I have to win the debate. So it became a clash of the madhabs in order to outdo one another. So this was a big problem that later on caused a lot of rivalry, a lot of factionalism, is court debate. For entertainment, why was the court doing it? For entertainment, like sport you said, right? Just like we see sport, two teams fight, or two wrestlers fight, or two boxers. What is the point? What do we get out of seeing this? We get entertained, right? You don't, but some people do. A lot of people do, right? Two football teams fight, two basketball teams are right. What is the point of sport? Sport is for entertainment, to entertain people, and people, like you said, identify. They're looking for groups to identify. So Michigan State versus University of Michigan, and what is all of this? It's like we are better and you are not as good as us. It's about rivalry. It's about showing who's the boss, who's better, and so on. So that's what started happening with the madhab. After the destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate and the decline of Ijtihad, culminating in its disappearance, the number of madhabs decreased to 4, which evolved into completely distinct and oftentimes antagonistic entities. So due to these reasons, at the end, how many madhabs remained? Out of all those 100, only 4, the ones which we know of. And many of the great madhabs and their scholarship was lost. Today we don't have their books. Many of the, like some of the books are referred to by these great imams. Like for example, do you know that Imam Shafi'i, he said, according to him, Imam Layth in Egypt was a greater alim than Imam Malik. How many of us have heard about Layth ibn Sa'd? Have you ever heard about Laythi madhab in your life? You have heard. Okay? Very few people know about it. But in Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i's time, Imam Shafi'i is saying his madhab, his scholarship was greater than even that of Imam Malik. Today we don't even know about. He's lost in legend. He's lost in history. His books are gone. His students dispersed. They went to other madhabs taken by others. So we lost a lot of great scholars and we lost a lot of great scholarship because of this madhab rivalry, which ended up only having 4 at the end, which won out. Doesn't mean they were the only 4. There were many, many others. The differences between them became insurmountable in the minds of their adherents, and madhab fanaticism and sectarianism was rife. So then, after these 4 emerged as the winners, then they started fighting each other for supremacy. Who's going to become the dominant madhab of the Muslim world? They started fighting each other, and that's what caused the fanaticism. Since the applicability of Sharia to all times and places depended largely upon the principle of ijtihad, the loss of this vital principle spelled the inevitable stagnation and decline of it. So once these 4 emerged as the winners, what else stopped? The process of ijtihad stopped. What caused these 4 madhabs to come in the first place? Ijtihad. The scholars of these madhabs made ijtihad using Quran and Sunnah. New things are happening. They're trying to research. They're trying to give rulings based on their circumstances, their culture, their time. But after these 4 became the dominant madhabs, then the scholars who came later on, they did not want to do ijtihad anymore. They said, let's keep following the 4. So now you are not going to use ijtihad to come up with new rulings based on changing times and circumstances. You're going to keep following the old rulings. So do you know, for example, even now in the Muslim world, you'll find some scholars, they are following fatwa given 6, 7, 800 years ago. You're following a fatwa which a scholar gave in some part of the Muslim world 800 years ago, and you're following it now in your time. What will happen to that society? circumstances have changed, people have changed, culture has changed, everything has changed, and you keep following that fatwa from 800 years ago, of course you're not going to develop. Of course you're not going to go anywhere forward. 800 years ago, that fatwa was the modern fatwa of the time. The scholars used their ijtihad to come up with that fatwa, to come up with the right answer for their time. But 800 years later, that fatwa is no longer going to work because, as I said, everything has changed. So this is the problem which happened with the Muslim world. After these four madhabs emerged, there was complete stagnation of Islamic research. This is the key word, research. Any society wants to go up, it is based on research. What's the difference between the third world countries and the developed countries? Always new research is going on. Actually, if you see our elementary school up to high school, even I would say up to undergrad level, the third world countries, they are more brilliant. Their students are more brilliant. When many of us come from different countries and we go to high school here or we go to college here, we say, what? You guys are doing this now? We did it in 7th grade. But where do we start going down? What is the point where these universities go beyond the Muslim university? Islamic university is once they reach master's level. It's once they reach PhD level. That's where they shoot above the rest of the world because of their research. They invest money. They give funding. They invest resources in finding new things. Whereas we don't do that. We just keep doing the same thing over and over because we have no money, no resources, no corruption and all of that stuff. The same thing applies in Islam, religion. There is two things, Sharia, which will never change. That is Quran and Sunnah. That is fixed. We don't need to do research in that. That is there from Allah. And then there is fiqh. When new circumstances come, how do you apply the Sharia in this new circumstance? That's where we need research. That's where we need new thinking, new minds, understanding of the issues. If you keep following 900 years old fatwas, how are you going to solve the problems of the current world right now? Right? So this is the area where Islam then started, Muslims started going down. Up until they were doing research, they were going on top of the world. As soon as they stagnated, they stopped research, they started going down. Anyone has any comments or questions? It's coming back. It's already reviving. In my lifetime, I've seen in the last 30, 40 years, there's now the scholars who are coming in certain parts, not everywhere in the world, but in some parts of the world, they are now going back to the concept of ijtihad because they have seen the results, the disastrous results of just keep following blindly the old fatwas of different times and different cultures of the past. So it's coming back, inshallah. I think it's time for Azan. Let's listen to the Azan. That was showing its sign. I don't know. That was showing it. Is it? Yeah. Ten minutes to Iqama. Okay. Wow. Allah. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة والدرجة الرفيعة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته وارزقنا شفاعته يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time. We just have 10 minutes. I wanted to get into the Hanafi Madhab, but today we could only get through the overall picture of how these madhabs, these four madhabs started. Inshallah, next time we're going to get into the specific madhabs and we're going to see how they are different to each other and what causes that difference. Why, if you go to a Hanafi book, they'll give you one fatwa, and you go to a Maliki book, it'll give you a different fatwa on the same issue. We're going to get into some of those aspects of their differences and also how these early scholars treated those differences versus how the later ones dealt with those differences. How the early scholars showed flexibility, learning from each other, respect for difference of opinion, and how the later ones became rigid, they became a little more fanatic, their followers became fanatic and started dividing on this basis. Anyone has any final comments or questions here? Yeah, so we have some narrations from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam which mention the stages of political development in the Muslim world. And he said, so it starts with the Khilafah, and then it will be kingdom, okay, and then it will be these dictators, okay, which we are going through right now, and then it will return to Khilafah. Okay, so we know Khilafah is going to be established for sure in the Muslim Ummah again. The question is it going to happen before the time of Imam Mahdi or with the advent of Imam Mahdi? That we don't know. Okay, but we hope and we should keep working on it. And the way you work on it is by, first of all, increasing your own understanding and knowledge of Islam within your local community, uniting over these principles, teaching our children how to respect these differences. Because what divides us are these differences, right? The cultures, the madhabs, the ethnic, differences, the cultural differences, the norms, the traditions. This is what is dividing us. I mean, for example, one of the things which we need very badly, I think, in my opinion, is a unified language. That's a very basic thing. If you don't understand and share a language, you're going to constantly be divided. Because what happens in our masajid in social gatherings? We tend to cling to those people who are from our country, from our language, from our tradition, and we tend to ignore others. Even though we might say, Salam, how are you doing? Just a base level kind of connection with the others. But we really are intimately connected to people who share our language and culture. And so if we have a unified language, which was there in the early years when Arabic was the language of the Muslim world, and even in some parts of the world, other languages like Farsi, for example, Persian was spoken in large parts of the Muslim world. People felt more connected because your traditions connect, your language, your emotions, you're able to share emotions with each other. So that's a start. We should all try to work on a unified language. At least we should learn the Arabic language for the sake of the Quran, for example. How are you going to understand the Quran if you don't understand Arabic language? So those are the things which inshallah we hope that eventually we will get back to Khilafah one day, but we have to work for it. We are a long way away from it right now. Kingdom, yeah. This is a long subject, how kingdom started. A quick answer to that is when Muawiyah radiallahu anhu became the Khalifa, the fifth Khalifa, when he was dying, he made his son the next Khalifa or the next. And so that's what's the difference between a king and a Khalifa? A king is by hereditary, right? the father, the son, the grandson. That's what kingdoms are. Khilafah is not like that. I mean, all the four khulafa, there is no relation between them. Abu Bakr is not related to Omar. Omar is not related to Osman. Osman is not related to Ali. Yeah, of course, they are all from the Quraysh and tribe, but they're not like relatives like in that way. They're not sons and fathers and brothers and so on. But later on, once Muawiyah radiallahu anhu made that decision, then it became the norm. And so Khilafah was replaced by this Mamlukiya or this kingdom. So we had the Banu Umayyah, then we had the Banu Abbas, then later on we had the Banu Osman, the Ottoman Empire, and so on. So that's how it started. Anything else? All right, so we'll stop here, inshallah. Next time we'll continue with the Hanafi madhab, get into the details of that. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته